Friday the 13th. Let's get ready to kill some teens.
So the game loads up and I'm so far quite impressed with it. The shitty VHS quality look really is faithful to the original movies, and it really does give it its own style. I've also noticed that the game is quite faithful in other ways, having every incarnation of Jason thus far as a playable character. And I'm rather liking the look of the camp counselors as well, both of which are customizable and both of which can level up after every encounter.
Alright then, now to play the game.
Wait, what's this? Servers are down?
I won't piss on the online servers. I'm here for the single player, damn it. Alright, private match, go go! Hello?
Okay, so apparently the single player isn't out yet.
Then why release the fucking game then? Just hold on a sec. Hey Jason. Yeah, it's me. I'm gonna have to cancel, I'm afraid. Yeah. Take care of yourself, man. Okay. Jason? Jason? Well, he'll get over it. On the bright side, I can talk about the game I've been playing all week. Injustice 2!
Yeah, it's been a while since I've covered a fighting game, and come to think of it, it's been a while since I covered a new game as well, but unlike Dead or Alive, I'm actually somewhat enthusiastic and knowledgeable about this series. NetherRealm Studios decided to make a Mortal Kombat game based around the DC characters whilst working on Mortal Kombat 10, and so we got the hybrid game Injustice Gods Among Us. It's a rather decent Mortal Kombat clone with an interesting premise surrounding things that the DC fans may already be familiar with, but things that newcomers won't be confused by and thus scared of as soon as they press the start button. It also did an excellent job of bringing the characters to life and making them look faithfully similar to their comic book counterparts. The game, in my opinion, hasn't especially aged well, as it feels a bit clunky at times. It's not as refined as Mortal Kombat 10 or even Mortal Kombat 9. A few of the gimmicks, like the Clash gimmick, just weren't exactly to my liking, as they're not very well implemented, nor are they well explained. So the only thing that is accomplished is confusing the fuck out of first time, or hell, even short term players. It took me a while to understand what the Clash system actually was, and by the time that I did, I failed to see the point in it anyway. Now though, I do get the point in it, and I know how to use it to my advantage, but I still don't especially like it.
Anyway, I'm here to talk about Injustice 2, not 1, so let's get to it.
So, as you can see, there are quite a few changes as to how this game operates, as the interface is now based around Brother Eye. I kinda like this because the mechanical voice actually makes sense in this game, though I can't say that I'm a big fan of Brother Eye as a character or as a thing that exists at all really. He's only in the campaign to more or less advertise the net features of Injustice 2, it's kinda like the ending of Little Big Planet 1. And the way that he speaks is just so strange. He either sounds really annoyed with a just get it over with attitude, or really dumbfounded like he doesn't understand what words are. Brother Eye connects to the net feature known as the Multiverse, which is more or less the Towers mode from Mortal Kombat 10. Though they had similar towers in Injustice 1, these have been changed so that they change every few hours to offer new challenges. And as a concept, I like this. I actually like this a lot over the traditional tower structure, as it increases the lifespan of the game indefinitely and also allows a number of interesting scenarios for the player to test their skills against and overcome for rewards and more challenges. However, I will say that these scenarios do cross certain lines that in order to explain it, I'll have to talk about the customization aspect of this game. Right, so you're probably thinking that this is going to be like Soul Calibur 5 with its heavy customization. If you think that, then you are wrong. This is much more like an MMO where you get new equipment that strengthens your character and boosts their stats. It's not so much about how your character looks, it's more about the stats and how your numbers improve your character's performance. You get these pieces of equipment by winning matches or towers and getting loot crates for doing different towers in different ways. I personally like this as a thing, since it definitely gives you more of a reason to do the towers other than just bragging rights. Sure, in Mortal Kombat 10 you got the occasional reward for doing these towers, like a title card background or some shit, but they were only things like additions to your title card at a stretch, or something rather insignificant like that, and even these lame ass rewards were somewhat of a rarity. Here, every tower promises you a piece of equipment, or a colour scheme, or a special move, or anything. And assuming that you don't lose like 51 times in a row like I did at one point, you're always going to win something. Now, this leads to one of the game's many criticisms, the microtransactions. The player is able to transfer their real-world money into in-game credits and jewels. The credits buy loot crates and the jewels buy colour schemes for your characters, some of which change the character into an entirely different character, like the Flash can become Reverse Flash or Captain Cold can become Mr. Freeze. I know that most people hate microtransactions, and though I'd prefer them to be a thing that didn't exist, I have to give the game credit by saying that this is microtransactions done right. At no point are you required to spend money to have any form of advantage in the game, and everything that you can buy can be earned by doing a couple of towers. For example, if you want 4 gold loot crates, you can either do 4 easy towers, invade 4 people in the AI team mode, or even do the story campaign, or you can spend about £10. I also want to add that the Diamond and Platinum crates cannot be purchased, which again balances this feature out quite nicely. As in, it's possible for one player to get Bronze crates with 4 decent items for the characters that they actually play, and for another player to get 16 items for characters that they've never touched. This basically leads to it being a case of, you can pay, but you'd be pretty fucking stupid to do so. The colour schemes, on the other hand, are harder to earn legitimately, as you need to get thousands of gems for the good ones, and you only get about 100 or so at a time. I have to admit, now that I have actually bought 2 characters with real money over my PSN account, though each of these only cost me like 79p, which in the grand scheme of things isn't a bad way to cut corners and save myself 2 weeks of work. That, and the money was already left over from a previous top-up card, so it's not like I had to actually run to the bank to pay for these. Really though, I pity anyone who spends money on the loot crates because they're just shortening the lifespan of their game. I know that it's a personal preference thing, but come on, you're never going to get any good if you just buy your way to the top. The equipment gives you a minor stat boost, but even with level 20 at top tier equipment, you could honestly be beaten by a highly skilled low level player. This means that the equipment is helpful but not essential to being a great player. Though one thing that's always bugged me is, why is it that some pieces of equipment at a higher level have lower stat boosts than their low level counterparts? You can have level 20 pieces of equipment that have all zeros on the stats, but then have level 10 equipment that go into triple figures. I could understand pieces of level 19 equipment having slightly better stats than a level 10, or rare or ultra epic, whatever you call it, gear being better than regular gear, but how is it that level 17 gear can trump level 20 gear? It doesn't make any semblance of sense. However, I will say that there are points where being good just isn't enough, and this is the line that I previously mentioned. These mainly being the boss fights. Now, don't get me wrong, I love a good challenge and the idea of there being more powerful enemies is good and all, but these bosses are just so damn cheap that they're way more frustrating than challenging. If you take this Deadshot boss as a pure example of what I'm talking about, this took me 2 hours to beat simply because this boss is cheap as fucking chips. He fires shot after shot, more or less pinning you on the other side of the map, and the only way to escape him is with a super roll. Even then though, he has lightning fast reflexes and ignores half of your hits. This wouldn't be so bad, except the asshole has 3 times your health and does double the damage. Add that to the bullshit constantly shooting you on the far side of the room crap, and this goes from a simple challenge to being fucking infuriating. The same thing is the case with some other bosses, who have fortified health. They have the same damage resistance to the point that they're almost invulnerable until you finally break through said shield and leave them vulnerable, but by this point you've lost so much health that you lose immediately after. That Deadshot fight earlier took me 2 hours to beat, and at the end of it I had severely blistered thumbs, and that was a fight that I gave a fuck about, trying to unlock equipment for a character that I care about because I use them a lot. So if I was barely willing to go through that, what makes anyone think I'd go through it again for a lesser reward for a character I don't want? As usual with Netherrealm bosses, they're unfair, cheap, and require tactics that are incredibly cheap in order to beat them. This tradition goes right back to Shao Kahn from Mortal Kombat 9 for me, and well, I know that some people who don't know might think I'm complaining that it's too hard, but no, that isn't my complaint. Hard is good, cheap isn't. You know, I didn't really cover the fighting aspects of Dead or Alive, but that's mostly because I didn't really know how to back then. Now though, I'd like to revise that game just briefly to compare this to that game, because in all honesty, the fighting game aspect of Dead or Alive just isn't very good to me. To me, a good fighting game isn't about being fast or a god with combos. It's about being in control of the situation. This is why I like Mortal Kombat the best, since players who are in control of the situation are rewarded with brutalities, and in Justice, similar players are rewarded with scene transitions and super moves. Dead or Alive, on the other hand, felt more like it was just a mash buttons to victory kind of game. Like I'd learnt one combination of kicks and I'd be mashing the circle and triangle buttons to try and win. I never felt like I was in control of the situation, even in the most difficult or easy of battles. If I ever played a team battle with my friend, we'd always just have one character dies and then another character wins and then another character dies and then another character wins and so on and so forth until we were down to our last 2 members, and then it would just be more or less a crap shot as to who'd win. Sure, Dead or Alive fights are faster, but I felt like the substance of a good MK fight between 2 skilled players is lost. It's quicker to pick up, but it's not really a game that I can see anyone mastering. My point is that these games are about tactics and skill. Combos help, sure, but being good with gadgets and timing and being able to control when your attacks are hit are far more important in this game. And the point where this should be crucial is the bosses, but sadly, they just don't offer this, and Injustice's campaign boss is really no exception. Brainiac, like Super Shinnok, is pretty average as a character, but with overpowered attacks. Attacks that are so overpowered that you can't use them whilst playing as him, to my knowledge anyway. He has these large mechanical tentacle things that are able to knock off thirds of your health every time you're exposed to them. Shinnok also had a similar cheap attack, which was a red lava beam of death, and it just feels like the game is trying to compensate for offering otherwise substantial but otherwise not very memorable bosses. Tekken is a game that also has its fair share of bullshit, but one boss fight that I actually liked was Jinpachi Mishima, who was hard and cheap at times, I admit, but you could learn to avoid his cheapness. For example, he could fire a fireball at you that you could simply step out of the way of. This is actually something that I liked, as it allowed the player to adapt to the boss instead of just being fucked if they were caught off guard. Inferno from Soul Calibur 2 is another boss that I like, simply because he was tough and had multiple disciplines, but came across as more of a challenge than an annoyance. He could be beaten with any character so long as the player was able to adapt to the constantly fluxing playstyle of the boss. The best bosses for me are typically the ones that require the player to have learnt something in order to beat them, and though I get the impression that that's the idea, even after learning something I still struggled like crazy. Right, so before anyone else complains about my complaining, forcing me to complain some more about their complaining about me complaining about... What else is there? Well, There's also the aforementioned AIT mode, which is something that I rather like. Basically, you pick your highest level, best equipped characters to defend your honour, and you then unleash a squad of fighters to attack another player's characters. You get to watch the fight play out, and if you win, you get a gold crate, and if you lose, you get a bronze one. I like this as a concept since it requires the player to be tactical in two ways. One with the gear, deciding whether to boost one stat hugely or several stats minorly to balance it out, but it's a good idea as you can control the tactics of the characters as well. You can make them fight up close and personal, at long range, make them good at combos, make them good at counterattacks, blocking, grabbing, whatever you'd use that for, whatever suits the character or their opponent or even the player really. This requires you to have an understanding of the character as well as your opponent, which is honestly a good way of implementing the whole getting to know the characters thing, as most good fighting game players do. I kind of like this as a thing, as it's more of a net feature than online play. As someone who isn't too fond of online play due to the god-awful players on there, I honestly prefer games like this and Hitman Absolution, which offer the player the chance to compete, but not necessarily directly. Beating one another's scores or even finding ways to indirectly fight is always better with me, to be honest. I've actually had so much fun with this over the past few days, though I do find it annoying how my level 20s can get their arses handed to them by level 7s. Another odd mix of praise and complaint that I have is the traditional towers, which I'm honestly glad that they kept the arcade experience intact, with multiple options between 5, 8 and 12 battles, even if they did hide these towers in the weirdest of places. These are good ways to get used to and even level characters without any stakes or gimmicks getting in the way, but one, as mentioned, this area is hidden in the multiverse in the battle simulation section. I honestly had to Google how to find it in order to do so. And second of all, the rewards are inconsistent as fuck. At one point I got a silver crate for doing the easiest tower, but a couple of shitty credits for doing the hardest one. It's honestly beyond baffling. I'd definitely say that most of the endings are worth it, as you get a cutscene that's narrated by the character and partially animated as well. Now, the visuals have also changed, which is both good and bad. I personally prefer the stylized look of the characters as seen in the first game. They looked like 3D versions of their cartoon comic book counterparts. Here though, they've clearly gone for a hyper-realistic look, and though this works for the most part, I have some issues with this change. For a start, I usually prefer stylization over realism. Though realistic visuals look good now, you can bet that it's going to be incredibly dated very soon. Take Heavy Rain as an example. That game used to look beautiful, but now I'm not too sure it holds up very well visually. Sure, it looks good, especially for the time, but the hyper-realistic nature of the characters fades with time compared to that of, say, We Love Katamari. And that game's visuals haven't really changed with time due to the fact that the blocky characters always were a thing. It looks like it's supposed to, whereas realistic games tend not to. Another issue that I have is that though this game looks amazing at some points, in others it's a little lacking. Some characters look a hell of a lot older than they should, like Supergirl. Harley Quinn especially looks about 40 in some scenes, and it's incredibly jarring when characters go from looking like real people to CG puppets in the blink of an eye. I feel like the graphics technology just hasn't been perfected yet, as it only really works at certain shots, typically when there's grain or something in the way to mask the image. It's somewhat what game developers used to do about 10 years ago, but people began to see through it, so it's not really done as much anymore. Now, I know that the last time I covered a fighting game, I put a lot of emphasis on the campaign, but I've done some thinking and I'm not really into the idea of doing that again. I just don't feel like there's enough material to keep it going, there isn't enough to work with. Not that it's bad or anything, it's just, it's not bad enough to be silly, and it's not good enough for me to praise it. It's mostly sane and doesn't have any especially weird moments, but equally doesn't have any Mask of the Phantasm moments either. Well, it's not just that, it's a pretty new game as well, so I don't see it as fair as to spoil the campaign for anyone. However, I will comment on the gameplay aspect of it, since the player is actually given a choice as to who they fight as at certain points. And I honestly like this as a thing, since you have the option to change it up or stick to a character that you're better at using. Firestorm, for instance, is a character that I suck balls with, but Blue Beetle, on the other hand, is a character that I'm actually so good at that I'd consider him one of my top 5 to play. It's good when it offers you this different options of style, so that the player can either offer themselves a bigger challenge by picking someone new, or sticking with what they know, and I can commend the developers for that. So, that's Injustice 2. How does it hold overall? It's a large improvement over the first game, and I'd say that it's, in some ways, as good as Mortal Kombat 10, but it still doesn't feel as well polished. One of the biggest problem areas is the introductions, which I'm glad that they put in, but they're clearly cutting some corners. At first I thought that these were randomly generated, and that seemed like a cool idea to me. Even if some things didn't quite make sense, it was still an interesting concept and it would allow unlimited possibilities. But no, the developers were just so lazy that they used a handful of different quotes as all-purpose retorts, and I feel like it's somewhat lame to go through the effort of having the introductions, but then just have really bland, repetitive dialogue. The same goes for the Clash banter. It just makes it nonsensical due to lazy recycling, where it really wasn't necessary to do that. You could have just done what you did for Mortal Kombat 10. It's stuff like this that puts it back into the clunky territory of the first game. I feel like if these developers give it their all, they could probably make something better than Mortal Kombat. But it's almost like they get to a certain point, and then they just say, right, just fill these holes in with whatever we've got, and let's go home. So, to conclude, this game is overall good. Despite its many flaws and setbacks, if you're not already a fan though, I highly doubt that this game will win you over, and it still somewhat pales in comparison to Mortal Kombat 10, due to the fact that it feels like a neutered version of that game. I feel like it doesn't necessarily have its own personality yet, and I feel like that is also something that possibly needs some work on it. It's definitely worth your time though, if it appeals to you on any level, but if not, then you might want to hold off paying full price for it, or at least wait until the DLC fighters like Red Hood, Sub-Zero, and Bibleman are released.
What? I can dream, can't I? Well, since this is going to be shorter than the other reviews, might as well leave you with a bit of a treat. I have managed to construct the ultimate battle between evil and chaos, Bibleman and the Joker.
Bibleman! Seems you have something that belongs to me.
What's that?
Your colour scheme.
Begin!
Here, hold this. Oh.
No shit.
Damn you, Bibleman.
Only God can judge me.
You're a fucking dick, Bibleman.
Fuck.
There are curtains. Pull yourself together.
Never.
Okay? Oh look, it's Jesus.
Where?